I think we are at, here we are. Meeting recording started, and we're at 10:02, and we have enough folks, so let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so let's go ahead and talk about the stuff coming up with frames. And one thing I will say to head things off is tomorrow's launch is not going to be frame transactions. It's some other super, super secret thing that Dan is cooking up. So we'll see what that is. Um, Cool. Want to go through some Farcaster topics, some Wecast updates. We'll start with frames. So, couple of things on the radar for frames that we want to get folks input on. One is the, no pun intended, one is the text input spec, which we've shared out here. It's pretty straightforward. The goal is to add a single text input into a frame. And whenever you click any of the buttons associated with the frame, the text input gets signed and sent along. So you can use this to do anything you want, from collect inputs for chess moves to email addresses to whatever you want to collect from the user to build applications. And hopefully this unlocks a whole other degree of creativity with these apps. We kept it very, very simple. The goal for this version is to build something incremental that unlocks a lot of freedom and not overcomplicate things. So we didn't do things like multiple text fields. We didn't bind text fields to specific buttons, so they would do different things, or like try to do fancy modals where the text is collected later. I'll sort of pause here for a second and see if anyone has live feedback on this. I think async feedback would always be super helpful, but let's see if anyone has to share anything. Jason asked in comments, could we do regex search inside a text input? I think that's a good suggestion. We might add it in a future version. For now, I think the first version of what we're thinking about is either input with a general error surface, so the server can send out an error and whatever it likes, and that can actually be shown on the client. And then maybe we'll actually have validations in the future, so you can quickly give feedback to the user that a particular move doesn't work well. Cool. Anyone else have any questions or thoughts on text input? Text input, good, great. Easy topic. Let's keep going. The next one we have is the item potency key. So the thinking behind this, the original goal for this spec was two things. One is if a user clicks the same button twice while looking at the frame, or a Farcaster app sends you the same signature multiple times, it's kind of a pain for apps to deduplicate these things. The second goal was, we've seen some folks starting to use the redirects for auth. So you send someone to another site, and then you use the signature for authentication. The one tricky part with this auth model today is if someone were to capture that signature somehow, they could replay it and log back, excuse me, log back as the user into your website, which isn't ideal. So we came up with this proposal to add a UUID or just sort of a generic tag, like an item potency key that the server could send down. One challenge we realized is that these two use cases, A, are slightly different, and B, have different challenges. So one annoying component of this is because we don't refresh because the initial frame load is cached for all users to make feed generation quickly, it's always going to have the same item potency key. And you can even try to do tricks like item potency key plus FID, but it ends up in the state where that signature packet is still replayable. So we walked away based on people's feedback, feeling that the second goal wasn't really going to be served by this item potency key. So we're still working on this design and figuring out whether this is the right path forward, or whether we sort of split these goals into two separate things and do a separate item potency key and a separate thing for making auth a little more secure. So this spec is kind of on hold for now until we figure out a better path forward. We're not going to be implementing this as is. Cool. Any questions on that? All right, rolling down the list. Three other things that are in progress, but we don't have a spec for yet. We're starting to think through transactions, how we can actually make transactions work within frames. And as soon as we have a design doc, or even just a rough idea of how we're going to implement this, we'll share this with folks. I know everyone's been very excited for this, but we're still in the very, very early stages of figuring out how to do this safely. And the big thing that we're trying to think about is like what's going to actually make this secure from a frames perspective, and what's going to give users control over their wallets and make sure that people aren't able to just push random transactions into their wallets. Second set of changes that we're working on are privacy changes. So right now, when you load a frame, you load it directly from the frame server. So in theory, the frame server has this list of IP addresses of everyone that's visiting it. We're going to make a couple simple changes to proxy those requests so that the IP addresses are masked, so it's not actually exposed to the frame server. Third bucket of changes are developer tool changes. So there's going to be a set of things that we are improving on the dev tool side of things in terms of just making the frame validator a lot easier, giving you more real-time feedback. There's a bunch of small improvements that we've gotten feedback from folks on. So those, we're just going to do them. We're not going to write a spec for them. They're just going to roll out as soon as we finish them because they're all fairly minor improvements. Cool. Jason asked on text input, do we have a date? We are starting to work on it right now, and it'll ship as soon as it's ready. Hopefully today or tomorrow, but potentially Monday. We'll keep you guys posted when it launches. Cool. That's all we have to talk about for new frame things for now. I want to pause here and open up questions to the group. Anything related to the things that we talked about, or just general frame questions, or things that we want to discuss as a group? Madan, you had a question?
Yeah. As an alternative to the idempotency key, there was a solution that somebody shared on Wecast
Madan, are you
about.
able to unmute and chat, or are you running into some issues?
Are you able to hear me? Oh.
Oh, we hear him.
Okay. Yep, there we go. I had my audio off this whole time.
Oh, okay. So there was a solution. There was an alternative solution to idempotency key for auth that somebody implemented. They essentially, like, the frame server would respond with a unique identifier in the response for the redirect, and then the redirect URL would then map it to whatever the signature was on the redirect side of things. Have you considered this solution? Why is this not a viable alternative to idempotency key?
I think something like that probably could work. We're going to scope this out. I think the thing that we were trying to do with idempotency key was try to be clever and knock it out in one stroke and have this like single idempotency key that works for both. And both helps with that. And I think that doesn't make sense anymore. And so I think we're going to kind of split these into two separate components. Have one be like, hey, this is for authentication, and this is how you securely pass a unique key down to make authentication work. Like right now, you can still do authentication of a sort if you keep track of like timestamps and things, and it's kind of messy. So we just want to take these two steps and kind of separate them into two smaller pieces and come back with something.
Sounds good. Yeah.
And the core problem is, I think, the first frame. Like, I actually think if we ship the idempotency key, it's very easy to implement a thing which is like you have a start button and then you have a login button, but that double click is kind of annoying, and we want to see like what's the best way where we can have an experience where on that very first frame load you're actually able to get logged into that site if someone wants to log you in without having to go through this like panel of keys.
I have a few more questions, but I'll wait for others and then maybe if time remains.
I think you should just go for it. No.
Okay. So error handling. I think right now frame actions. Sometimes there's errors on there. Could we standardize that and put that in the spec in terms of like what clients should do in that regard when frames are actually erroring out for better UX?
So this is when the frame server returns like a 500 or something like that?
Yeah, a non-200.
Yeah, we have something in progress. It was going to be honestly a very simple something went wrong error that shows up over the frame when something like that happens. I don't like, were you thinking of something more specific than that, or just like
No, I was just saying to standardize how clients generally handle it. I know that we can't enforce how clients handle it, but putting a general recommendation out would be nice.
Yeah, I think we'll build like a quick implementation of it. I think it's probably going to be something like stay on the last frame that you were on, show a short message to the user, and maybe there's a fancier spec where we can let the server return some custom text, which would also solve the problem that Jason brought up earlier with the text, the text regular expression stuff. So it could be like one nice design that solves all of these things.
Great. And then the last question was around network latency being very visible because of frames now. So we've had a lot of times when like people cast out frames and they're not immediately interactable because they're using a different hub to validate. And either the cast is missing or there's a gap in between, like being able to take action on a particular gate that might be related to an interaction and so on. So
So this is like a like or recast or redirect?
yeah, any particular action, like follow recast, and then interact with the frame. Now, what that means is that the like recast need to get indexed by other hubs, or like at least be available on other hubs to be able to do that. And so it's very apparent, at least in the early parts of when a cast goes out, as well as like when an interaction is needed, and then you need to validate it immediately. So what are we doing there in terms of like making sure that publishing remains much more real time?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. There's a couple of challenges here, right? One is we have a distributed systems of hubs that are spread across the world, and if somebody drops a message on a hub in India somewhere, and we're reading it from a hub in the US, there's fundamentally like a floor latency time of like so many 100 milliseconds before something can happen. That I think is going to be unavoidable. On top of that, I think we have a few more layered delays today, some of which are solvable, where I think Warpcast right now has had a few like issues on the back end as things have gotten like busy, and so occasionally we've had like 1 to 2 second delays to push things out. So two things that I would sort of recommend here. One is I think we have to design user experiences assuming that people are going to push things into different hubs all over the world. And so there is this expectation that like if you like something and then you want to validate it, you might get lucky and get it immediately if it happens to be on the same hub, or you might get unlucky and have like a 1 second delay. So I think like the 1 second delay we should definitely plan for. Beyond that, I think we can do a lot of stuff, at least on the Warpcat side, to get our message propagation down to a point where it's actually pretty quick. But the thing that I would say is this is a fundamentally client and hub related problem. Like if someone else builds another app and starts broadcasting to a hub and they're broadcasting slowly, this problem kind of continues in that world as well. So I do think we need to build user experiences that handle the degradation case, because I don't think it's a fundamentally solvable problem. It's just something that we can, in the best cases, work around.
Okay. Yep.
Cool. Any other questions on frames before we roll to address improvements?
Hey, Varun, it's Sinavar. Just
Hey.
wanted to know if you guys are having any internal discussion on whether the first frame, whenever it's rendered, it's possible that the frame caster could pass its own feed, so that it's already propagates with some data for other viewers. Because otherwise people will have to, let's say, I think as it was done with the interface, right? They have to pass their identifier and so on. But I think it would be much easier if by default the caster feed could be passed.
So what kind of tag would you want to pass down with the initial frame?
Just the Farcaster feed.
The feed?
Yeah.
Oh, I see. So this is when fetching it. So like whenever I go fetch it the very first time, I load it on the feed. Yeah, the thing we wanted to balance there was sort of the privacy versus availability angle, in terms of I think some users might not want, as they're scrolling their feed, their FIDs to be sent to every single application. But I do agree that in some cases it makes the user experience better, because you can now quickly go in and customize your frame to do something else based on the user, instead of waiting for them to click a button to interact. So we kind of stalled there because we didn't want to cross the privacy chasm just as early. But I do think that there's something there that we can unlock for better experiences. And it probably is a more complicated solution, where it's something like, hey, we now have verified frame developers, where you can set it up so that an FID can say, I'm the author of this frame. And if you, as the user, trust that frame or trust that author, then we can start doing certain trusted actions automatically when you've like interacted with a frame previously. But I think generically turning on the send FIDs on the initial request would be a little tricky from a privacy perspective.
Oh, I see. No, so what I meant, at least passing the caster, the person who casted the frame. But then you're saying that there is no other way, because you also need to pass the feed of whoever views that, right? I'm just wondering, could you not pass for the first render, could you not pass the viewer feed, but pass at least the caster feed in this sense?
Oh,
So more like
the caster already. Oh, got it, got it. Sorry,
Yeah,
I thought you were talking about the viewer, which makes sense.
no,
Yeah, I
no,
think
no. I completely agree with the from the privacy.
the caster one is a good suggestion. It's actually, I didn't call it out here, but that's actually one of the things that we had. So it makes it easier so you don't have to do another round trip. We actually have a proposal to say like, hey, what all bits of data can we pass up with that initial signed request so that you don't have to go request it from hubs? Because in most cases, this data is public anyway, so it just cuts a round trip for a bunch of devs. So I think that's definitely good feedback, and we will most likely ship that soon.
Thanks.
Cool. I think Rob had a question.
Yeah, so I was curious, is there any planned work for making local frame development easier? Like right now, it's just frankly a little painful, which usually requires like deploying out to our production systems and testing, and it just like it's hard to iterate quickly. So I was curious if you're considering like writing like a local embed or something that we could run within our development environments to simulate frames.
Yeah, it's a good point. Like it's kind of a pain to write and test frames today. I think the best stack that I've seen so far for like rapid iteration is like people using ngrok and like using our like /embed URL to do things today. I'm kind of curious from your dev setup perspective, what would make it easiest for you to iterate very, very quickly on frames?
Yeah, for us it'd be hard because like that'd be like piercing like a hole in our corporate firewall, right? Like, but to me, like potentially having like a like emulator or something that we could simulate the frame experience, obviously without like all the like security and attached like stuff you get through like the hub, but having something that would just simulate like the basics of the frame, just so I could test interactions. Like, did I format it correctly? Is the image look correct? Like, because I've had these iterations where I push in like the text is broken, so I have to wait like an hour to push another change. Like, it just makes iteration, I think, a bit slower. And I think people end up pushing janky frames to Farcaster, like because like they're just testing rather than doing it in a safe environment.
Yeah, that makes sense. Two thoughts on that. So one is I think we have this embeds framework that is kind of posted right now, and it's probably not as useful because you got to deploy it to get it to work. So we're making a bunch of changes to just improve the experience here, like logging all the state transitions between buttons, et cetera, et cetera. Once that's done, if there's no other solution that someone in the community has built, like we'll look into like, hey, can we make this like a standalone like package that you can just stand up on your server and run? It does sound like from the chat, DF from Mod has a frame rendering repo. I haven't played around with it, but DF, I don't know if you want to step up and give a quick 30-second pitch on that.
Yo, hey, from Mod, we were trying to enable mini apps through Mod. Now we're shifting all our focus to building infra to support frames. So we're writing some libraries to help making frames and testing frames easier. And one of the things we'll do is port the stuff we had for rendering frames in Mod to a standalone thing. If you have any problems with developing frames locally, just send me a message. I'm DF on Wecast, and would love to try and help make frames development easier.
Cool. So Rob, let us know in like a week to 2 weeks if you're still running into issues with this, or if between the combo of the better dev tools and mod stuff, you're actually in a better place, and we can revisit this if that's still a pain point. Okay, two more hands up. So maybe Frypan, do you want to go first?
Yeah, hi. Any thoughts on triggering a frame through a QR code? Because I think this could be very useful in real life events, especially Denver, probably.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I think you could do a crude performance trigger just by scanning the cast QR, just like embedding a link into the cast QR code and having it open up in your Webcast app. Were you thinking of something more involved?
I was not aware that you can create the QR code for Webcast that can link to a specific cast. Can you do this?
I think we would have to build like I mean, sorry, what I meant to say was you can take the Webcast cast URL, change it into a QR code using a QR generator, and then go post it up manually. We could do to make that easier was just like build in like into the share sheet, like a way to generate the QR code, which would just make it sort of one click so that you can generate the frame. But I like the suggestion. I'm actually going to take this down.
Cool. Thanks.
Paul, I think you had another question.
Yeah, it should be a quick one. The ask is debouncing buttons. So when the user clicks a button, disable like immediate re-clicks of any of the buttons. So I guess it's like a Warpcaster client request, but someone
Yeah.
we're collaborating with right now is getting like 8 submissions through before the paint back.
Yeah, I think the item potency key approach that we had was going to be the original solution to this. So I think if we ship that, we might just kind of stick with that. So you get the key and you can kind of dedupe based on the key. So that way, even if a client doesn't respect the standard, you're going to be able to do it. But if we can't figure out a smart way to work around the first frame problem, then maybe we'll actually do it as a client side, like, hey, don't let the user submit multiple times.
Yeah, it seems like ideally both the client and the protocol are like defensive. So if if Warpcast client can do it too, that'd be great.
That makes sense. Harpal, I think you had another hand up.
Yeah, I will make it quick. So I created a frame which had a dynamic open graph image, but the image does not update. To give you some context, the image has a number, and on every tap, the number is supposed to decrement, but it doesn't. It just shows the first number when I made the cast.
So two things on this. One is you can bust the cache manually by using the embed tool, just going there and hitting the refresh thing that change it. But two, if the problem is with the base image, the one that gets cached on the first load of the frame, we know this is kind of a problem right now, and we're working on a improvement to the Warpcast backend and the frame spec where you can specify a refresh window. It probably won't be lower than 30 seconds just because it's like very hard to do that. But we might say something like, hey, you as an app can specify the ideal content paint refresh time, and we will come and try to refetch the latest image. Would that solve your use case? Because I want to make sure if I'm understanding if this is the first image load or if this is something happening with future dynamic images.
Yeah, I think the way of like asking to refresh it programmatically would help. Like where I can
Cool.
say that after these many seconds refresh, yeah.
Yeah, because the way it works right now is the first frame load is a little special because we have to cache it for like performance feed loads and we can't always dynamically fetch it. But after that, we're actually pretty, as long as you set like the max age parameter and all of that well, most of the stack will just invalidate the cache and load those images very well. So it's always the first image that's kind of giving us problems right now. And I think we can get that to like hey, within 30 seconds, every 30 seconds, we will go and refetch that image and update that state. Cool. We'll give it maybe 10 more seconds to see if anyone else has questions before I roll on to the rest of the agenda. Great. Second chunk of things, address improvements. So one piece of feedback we got from folks is people who verified multiple addresses on Webcast sometimes get NFTs and things that they mint in frames delivered to unexpected addresses. And so Horsefax is working on an improvement, pretty straightforward, where you can just denote a primary address per chain, and you'll be able to, that will just be exposed on the hubs that you set publicly. And so frame developers can kind of use that to make determinations on where they send assets and NFTs and all that. Horsefax, anything you wanted to add on that?
Yeah, we'll probably start with primary address cross-chain, just as a heads up. So you'll be able to set a single primary address. And ideally, that's an Ethereum EOA, and we'll limit that to EOAs, so you can't mess up by like setting a smart contract address there to start. And then we will introduce cross-chain primaries. So it seems like that'll be immediately useful to a lot of people. So we're going to ship that soon, and then do cross-chain stuff as we need to think about that later.
Cool. Second big change, we're going to support verifications for Solana addresses soon. Long term, we just want verifications to be a standard where you can verify your ownership across any chain. So this unlocks a bunch of things where you can add other addresses as well. No timeline on that yet. We're still working through some final details, but hopefully by the end of this week or early next week, we'll be able to ship it. There's a question on whether this would be backwards compatible. I'm not sure which one that's referring to.
Oh yeah, sorry about that. I mean, if we're adding like a primary flag on the addresses, I just wanted to confirm that it won't break the existing data that we're getting back from like the validation endpoints.
No, it won't. There will probably be a new primary flag on the verification protobuf. So if you're reading that, from the client, or if you're reading that from the HTTP API, it'll just be a new field in the
That's perfect. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Okay. The Horsefacts has been off in a corner with Nick on our team working on something cool. Do you actually have a demo you want to show today?
Yeah, if you give me share screen, I can walk through it.
Great. Let me see if I can assign you share screen permissions. Hold on a second.
I'll voice over it a little bit while we're waiting. So yeah, we've been working on a simple demo called Quickcast, which is basically a lightweight Farcaster app. We are using this for sort of two purposes. One is to dog food our own libraries, so sign in with Farcaster. We're going to be adding the signer request flow, so you can request signers through Authkit as well. And so build kind of a simple repo here where we can test some of that out. That's been useful to us because we found a ton of React Native incompatibilities with Authkit, which we've been fixing. And then the second purpose is to have kind of a simple reference client for Farcaster. And there are too few examples we think out there of React Native right now as well. So we want people to have kind of a simple starter. Although shout out to Dylan who built the best one out there right now.
Nice. Having a little issues getting you to be co-host, so maybe I can be your hands while you narrate.
Cool. All right, let's do it
Oh,
live.
no, actually, there we go. You're the co-host. You're the co-host now. You can do it.
Yeah. Whew. All right. Saved by the bell. Okay. Yeah, here's Quickcast Web. Right now, we're working on shipping the React Native version of this, but we have just a simple demo up here at quickcast.vercel.app. Really basic feed right now. We're filtering out a lot of complex casts and things, but over time we'll try to build in more and more features and functionality here. But yeah, just really basic. This shows your profile. We load your profile data. We show you a simple feed, simple follower only feed over here. You can click and see your own casts in here. And at the moment, you can sign in and sign out through Authkit and sign in with Farcaster. Sign out. This has a corresponding React Native app, same simple UI, same interface. So folks can look at that as a reference. Let's try signing in. And we're working on adding frames to this as well. So we'll have a reference for how you can embed frames. And we are using this sort of as our test bed for adding the signer flow to Authkit. So we're going to start by doing the signer flow through the existing Wecast APIs, and then in the next few weeks or so, we're going to pull that into Authkit as well, so you can request a signer through Authkit. So we'll demo that in here as that comes up. In terms of the backing infrastructure, we are running the Postgres replicator on Railway, and the APIs in here are kind of simple examples of how you can work with the data in the Postgres replicator and collate data straight out of the Postgres replicator into building feeds and things like that. So goal here is to keep that layer pretty simple. This is never going to be feature parity with other apps like Wecast, etc. We won't necessarily add all the features we have in more complex apps, but this is kind of a something a little bit better than the demos that we've built so far, which are just kind of login buttons that can show you both a starter kit and kind of a simple example of a reference Farcaster client. Any questions on this?
Cool. One thing I'll just add here is we think this is going to be a really good starter template for anyone building in the ecosystem. So if you, like Dan's always said, mobile is the thing that needs to happen. And so we're really focused on making like a simple mobile starter template so that you can quickly clone this and start with like a React Native app that actually works with the backend and works with a stack that you're all familiar with, which is using Railway, using the replicator, using kind of all the very basic primitives that everyone's comfortable with. And so we're going through all the pain firsthand and sorting through everything so that it becomes easy for you, and we fix all the nitty-gritties with that. Cool.
Yeah, I'd also add one more thing. As we work on this, it's really helpful to know who's building on React Native. So if you have React Native feedback, reach out to me. We're debugging a lot there, and I'm sorry if you've been using Authkit with React Native yet, because it's probably broken in a bunch of places. So yeah, let me know.
Cool. We have one FIP out. This is for residual storage. We'll leave it out for feedback for another week before we start implementing it. But TLDR and residual storage and how we're thinking about it is hubs have actually been working pretty well, even with all the spike in usage. And one of the things we wanted to focus on was, hey, if a user's account expired, our mental model when we first launched Farcaster on mainnet was to be extremely conservative. And so we said, hey, if you rent storage for a year and you hit the end of the year, everything just gets nuked. you have a 30-day grace period, but at the end of the grace period, everything gets nuked. We assume you don't want to store your data. We didn't want to open up any vector for people to just keep sticking data on the network without having to pay for storage, because that makes hubs very difficult to run at scale. However, since hubs have actually held up pretty well and the storage has actually worked out much better than we thought, we wanted to optimize more for the user experience than for the developer performance, and say, while we're in this world, when a user storage expires, rather than nuking all of their data, we significantly reduce the number of casts and reactions that they can keep on the network. So most of their old history is lost, but we retain the very, very important parts of their profile, which is their profile info and their verifications, so they don't have to re-authenticate that if they come back, and their follow graph. So if they come back and renew their storage like a couple months later, their network and feed is still set up and ready to go. Caveat for all of this is we'll do this as long as hub storage isn't a problem. As soon as hub storage becomes scarce and we need to optimize for active users that are paying for storage, we might roll this back or make another FIP to change how many messages we store here. But the nice thing about this is for this year and likely for the next 2 years, this will offer a really good experience if someone forgets to renew and decides to come back a couple years later. Cool. If you have any feedback, feel free to leave it on that. And then let me bring up my screen one more time, and we can keep going. All right. Next thing, homepage redesign. So we've gotten a lot of organic traffic to the Farcaster site over the weekend, and I think over the whole week. And I think the biggest challenge for people has been it's too many clicks to get signed up and get set up with the application. So to make sure that we are helping as many people in the ecosystem onboard as quickly as possible, we're going to drastically simplify the Farcaster.xyz site to a very simple, welcome to Farcaster. Here's a way to get Wecast and get started and get into the ecosystem. Long term, we want this to be more of a home where when there are other wallet clients that you can sign up with, we actually guide people to like, hey, here are the different clients you can sign up with. In the current world where there aren't any other maintained wallet clients, it's actually been more confusing than helpful for users when people like try to explore different things and can't figure out how to sign up with other clients. And so we want to make this funnel really, really narrow so that we're bringing all these folks on board, and then they're going to sign into other apps like Supercast and all these other things as they discover them through the app. So site's going to be dramatically simple just to focus on getting people through the funnel. Cool. Great. Wecast updates. So sponsored signups, we talked last week about how we were going to start sponsoring some signups, or 2 weeks ago. We turned that on. So if you verify a phone number in the US and a handful of other countries, which Dan has casted about, we will actually cover the on-chain fees to create your account. This is an experiment we're running. We're going to run it as long as it seems like it's actually increasing conversions and bringing useful people on board. And if at any point we see it's being gamed or it's like not actually being that helpful, we'll roll it back. But I think it's actually been kind of useful to bring a larger group of people on board, and Wecast is going to keep this going and sponsoring this as long as it lasts. And the way this works, by the way, is Wecast just pays for the entire on-chain fees to the Farcaster protocol. So Wecast is just paying out all the money to Farcaster every time someone signs up. Sweet. Dan or Cassie, do y'all want to give a quick update on DCs? Because I know y'all have shipped a lot of things since the last meeting.
Yeah, so Cassie's been hard at work on driving a lot of this forward, but we made group invite links available. We increased the amount of people in a group up to 250. We added token gating. We're still working through a few bugs there. It turns out the OpenSea API might have a few bugs. And then we just added reactions. And then the near-term priority is to get at replies, and then like threaded replies, which I think for people, if they're thinking about like kind of like what is an 80% good replacement for Telegram, especially with larger groups, it's that set of features. Then I think we're going to kind of step back and then kind of figure out, based on people's feedback, but also kind of like what do we think is actually the single best thing that will actually continue to drive DAO within Farcaster, because our view is DAO is the primary thing that DC should be focused on. And I think that there are a bunch of features that we have on the team. If you have other things that you would like to see, feel free to DC me or Cassie.
Cool. And then point worth noting, Dan and I both covered this last time, but focus is really on getting DCs to feature parity where they're actually useful and functional. And then we're going to step back and think about two things, which is one, how do we actually make them secure and encrypted? And two, how do we actually make them open so that other clients can actually integrate with them? Just to be clear, we expect these to be large, hairy problems, and we don't expect to solve them in 2024. This is more like we'll have something in 2025 or beyond that will actually work. Dan, do you also want to do channels?
Sure. So I'm also spending time on channels, and the quick wins we're adding this week. Akshan on our team has been driving it. We added co-hosts, which I think should significantly help just manage a channel. And I think the primary function of a host, host mod, whatever you want to call it, but we're using the term host, is to actually clean up the feed. And I think we're going to try to make a few smart defaults on Wecast to just try to help that. I mean, we have a lot of new users who are signing up. They don't necessarily understand channels, whether it's malicious or unintentioned. They're kind of posting stuff off topic. I think some of the stuff from DGen, I'm generally very supportive of DGen. It's like a true community on Farcaster. But I think the tipping stuff has definitely started to spill out in a way that is annoying people who aren't part of that. So I think we'll probably think about some tweaks and work with the folks in the kind of like core part of the DGen community just so that they're aware. But hopefully that also helps alleviate some of this on channels. I think that the thing that we're focused on, I mean, we're going to be kind of like revamping Boost, probably do something like Pin, like add a few other kind of like basic features that I think we're hearing from people. I have a channel chat on Wecast with hosts, and so have a bunch of feedback coming in from there. But I think stepping back, one thing Varun and I believe is we want channels to be a growth driver for the protocol. And right now, channels are an engagement driver for existing users. And so I think there's a bunch of work there in terms of making it more intuitive for new users, but more importantly, what is going to be encouraging people to create new channels that start pulling people in to Farcaster, right? It's like, they start talking about the channel in the same way that you talk about a subreddit. And so I think still a little bit in brainstorm mode here, but hopefully have something this week that we're at least starting work on and headed in a direction where it can be an experiment that's driving or attempting to drive growth. I think we frames are great and there's a ton of interest, but TBD on is it actually driving growth? And I think, and especially retain growth. Whereas I feel pretty confident if we can crack channels in the same way that subreddits work on Reddit, then that's actually going to be a very durable way to grow down the protocol.
There was a question on making channels available in the protocol. So the philosophy that we've kind of taken with like shipping new features is one, get them in Wecast, get them to a point where we feel like they're feature complete and we kind of understand the shape of the feature, and then ship them on the protocol. Channels are kind of somewhere in the middle of that journey. They're at the point where we have, moderate to high conviction that they're going to work and that the shape is roughly going to be what it is today. But there's a set of features that we're learning about from our power users, like, hey, I actually want the ability to block people from channels because there's certain people that are spamming, et cetera, that we need to figure out like how we would make this work at the protocol level. So the stage we are at is like we still think there's like 1, 2, maybe 3 months of listening to users and figuring out the right feature set, which we want to keep doing in a place where we can iterate quickly, which is on Wecast. But 2, since we have like reasonable conviction that this feature is going to be around, we've also started exposing channel data over Wecast APIs. So this is not the same as getting it through hubs, but there's at least a way that you can pull this in the interim. So if you go to docs.farcaster.xyz and go to the reference APIs, and you go to the API reference, there's like a get all channels endpoint where we kind of give you all of the information that's here. If there's any other like small 1 or 2 endpoints that would make your life easier, if you're building other applications or trying to share channels, happy to consider requests to add them in here and make that easier while we figure out how to get them into hubs.
So let me just give a concrete example and I know we had a slightly different posture last year, and I think I tried to kind of indicate over the last couple of dev meetings, like we are taking a different approach in 2024 is to be relentlessly focused and ruthlessly prioritize on growth. Is we were able to ship co-hosts in a day. If that was at the protocol level and we had to do an FIP and coordinate with other clients that were having a set expectation with users that they had to manage their channel through it, it's just a mess. And we would be moving way slower. Would that be like week to 2 weeks just of, herding cats? Like boosts are probably not working. I have the data, like no one's really using it. We might just kill that feature. Like now if another dev has that, like it's like this. So the speed of iteration, and I think you guys have seen that like once the team is actually kind of rotated towards growth and like we've just been heads down and ruthlessly focused on that, like the amount of new stuff that's happening through Warpcast for the protocol and driving growth for the protocol, I think has picked up. And so I really want to emphasize is like, you gotta have to trust us. Like we started this as a protocol, we delivered hubs last year and a truly permissionless, like kind of core layer. But I think in 2024, every time we kind of get nerd sniped on, hey, can we move this more decentralized now? It's premature optimization. Like if we can get to somewhere where we have 100,000 DAO at the protocol level or 500,000 DAO at the protocol level by the end of the year, like that's going to be the biggest win. And we can then take a little bit of a breath in 2025, or maybe the team on the Warpcast side is expanded and we have a team working to kind of say, okay, the things that are clearly working, we're going to actually start to add to the protocol. But I can promise you, everyone who's building anything that wants users is going to be way happier if we achieve massive amount of growth with the bounds of quality, right? In 2024. So centralized approach, yes, not ideal. What Varun said, let us know where there are things that we can actually use the Warpcast API or potentially something through Nanar, like that's easier for other people to access. Like that's actually where we want to push stuff so that we can keep moving really fast.
Cool. Last agenda item. We're taking guesses for what the Friday feature will be. We've already told you it's not transactions. Let's see if anyone
Wait, are
gets
we
it in the
really
chat.
revealing the feature? I have like a whole launch.
Oh no.
for it.
I said we're taking guesses. I didn't say we were going to confirm if the guesses were right.
I had an epiphany last night for the perfect way to launch this feature tomorrow.
Okay. Well, I'll say, okay, we got to wrap the call now because we're out of time, but I'll say one thing. I don't think anyone has guessed what it's going to be yet. All right. Thanks all for coming this week. And we will see you all here back in 2 weeks. And nope, still no one's got it. All right. Talk to you later.